It's a pity you can't publish it. Remastering FanFic. And the tagline is, so you've written great fanfic, but you know it's a dead end because of copyright. Or is it? Tricks and ways that a fanfic can be cut up and remastered into an original work. Now, I've done this on a couple of occasions. Years ago, I was absolutely desperate to get published. I had been at it for years, and the stack of rejection letters was taller than I am. So I wrote some fanfics. I also did them because I was annoyed with the direction the show was going, and it was sort of my way of salvaging something that had given me enjoyment. And then I started to get some traction with my writing, and I looked at it and said, you know what? I did some good writing. I can't do anything with it, but can I? And I realized that, yes, well, the settings were all the property of the original production house, and the characters were the property. The plot line was mine. A lot of the action. So I endeavored to switch them over, and since then, I have had them marketed under completely different names. Hold us up. Okay. Sorry about that. Under completely different names. And this is basically how you do it. You do not own your fanfic. Technically, the studio owns it. Specifically, they own the characters, the places, the title. Fanfic is technically illegal under copyright law. And justifiably so. Creators deserve to get paid for their creation. Now, the honest truth is, as long as no money changes hands, you're pretty safe. It's not worth them going after you, in part because you are the fan base. You make the show as much as the people who make the show. If you get my meaning. You are who it's for, and you spend minutes of your life watching commercials to fund them. That doesn't change the fact that it's their intellectual property, but it means that they're not going to want to get a bad reputation. They're not really going to want to put off their audience. It's a PR nightmare. And it costs more in legal fees than they'll ever recoup, as long as you make no money from it. Money is the big dividing line, and you don't cross that. If you make money, they will come after you. But it's interesting to note that 50 Shades of Grey started as a Twilight fanfic. And yes, I have notes that I improvise around, because if I don't use them, I forget things. Okay, so we're going to get begin by just going through and changing every character name. Major characters, the secondary characters, all of it. Don't get cute. Don't use variations on the name. Come up with new names. If you need to get a baby name book, do so. Or you can just go up on the internet. Actually, there's some great sites if you're dealing with people of, let's say, I write Norse fantasy. I can get traditional Norse names that were used in the Viking period off the internet. Just put in names, Norse, it pops up. And you can do that for most cultures. And it's kind of a nice bit of added touch to it that you can do something that consistent. Change pet names in both forms. If you have a dog named Spot, turn it to a cat named Tiger. And that goes into some other things that you need to change. If you have somebody who calls their boyfriend/girlfriend Sweetie, change it to Honey. Change all place names, towns, bars, shops. And for good measure, even if it's a real world location, change LA to New York. Change the cities. Change the real life locations, so that it's a point of difference. SNR, everything identifiable from the parent work. Now, this has huge advantages. Not only does it remove the original evidence, but it also fixes it in your mind that this is a new work. And it will force you to go from the start and go through it line by line, just to smooth out any glitches that this causes. And in that smoothing process, you will add a lot. You will flesh out your story. Also, search and replace things like habitual saying. Like if somebody says 23 skidoo, change it to cool. Now, this ties into some of the other changes you're going to make, but it's just a good place to start. New phrases by the character changes their perspective and the perspective of the reader of them. You know, if you say 23 skidoo, well, that's really 1920s. Cool, that's more 60s, 70s. Still gets used today, but I'm an old fart, so. It makes the characters more your own. And don't just randomly pick something. Pick something that has the resonance you want it to have, but also helps your character become your character. Again, change the location if possible. Major cities are basically major cities. You can have LA sub in for New York, Toronto sub in for New York or LA. They do it in the film industry all the time. Major cities are pretty much the same. Now, there are certain things you have to watch for. If your fanfic involves the UN, well, that's in New York. However, you can put in something like the International Business Commission and set that in Toronto and have much the same sort of dynamics going on around it. And you can change careers. You take the ambassador from the UN and you turn them into the CEO, who is the chairman of the International Trade Commission. And you can still do the thing of the terrorists kidnapping them to bring leverage to cause change in their favor, and somebody having to rescue them. You can do the same story. But by changing these things, you, number one, make it yours. Number two, you put a slightly different spin on it, and you have this story that can actually get published. You just have to have enough points that your story still works. Yeah, be sure your made-up agencies and locations allow you to fulfill your plot, but be flexible. Can you switch a rural setting for a wild setting? You know, can it be a KOA campground and take that to wilderness camp? The idea is to look what's really important in your storyline, and then shift it. Like, you pick something that will still fulfill your needs, the needs of the story, but flip it just enough that it's different. If you're there on a farm, change a cattle farm to a goat farm. And if you're talking milk cattle, hey, there are goat milk farms. Lots of people can't drink cow's milk and can drink goat's milk. If they're growing carrots, change it to cucumbers, or vice versa, or whatever. Wild settings. Will a forest serve as well as a jungle? Look for the core elements necessary to make the story work and keep them while altering details. What you want is emotional consistency. And the truth is, the art of fiction writing is the art of playing your audience's emotions like a violin. You want your audience to feel. You want them to care. You want to be able to make them laugh. You want to be able to make them cry. And this is where the real talent comes in. And there is some fanfic out there that does that, which is why it's a shame that it will never get a wider audience. And this is a way for it to get that. The other thing to do, if you're writing genre, you can change fantasy into science fiction. Actually, you can control most things into the future and change them into science fiction, and bring a whole bunch of other changes along, because the human drama remains constant. It's just the setting. And you can flesh things out. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If you're doing the switch from a fantasy format or an urban fantasy format into a science fiction format, you can have, let's say you have a spell that causes incredible infatuation. Change it to a drug. Then you have to work out a mechanism for getting the drug into the person. But that's easy enough to do, and it can become added points of drama. A subway to the suburbs becomes an intercontinental maglev when you're doing this kind of conversion. You keep the nature consistent, but change the scale, because human needs remain consistent. And the purpose of society, purpose of technology, is to fulfill human needs. And if the quarry's on the other side of the river, and you have a ferry that takes you across the river because your village is on the other side of it, okay, that is not much different than a subway that takes you across town from where your apartment is to where the factory is, or an intercontinental maglev that takes you from the continent you're living on to the continent your work is. There's a huge amount of this that can be done. What does the magic technology have to accomplish for the plot to work? And then you do something equivalent with its counterpart. Do some research as to how magic science would work to be consistent with the new format. This is good advice for all writing, be it fanfic or original work. Do some homework. There is nothing that irks me more than somebody who doesn't do, who misuses interplanetary, interstellar, intergalactic. Let's break it down, people. Inter, between. Planetary, between planets in a solar system. Inter, between. Stellar, star, between stars. In a galaxy, between stars. Inter, between. Galactic, galaxies, between galaxies. Solar system, galaxy, universe. Get that sort of basic thing right. Get basic structures of science right. Do not have molecular change occurring at a chemical level. It puts people off and it misinforms the public, many of whom get their information. This is particularly important if you're dealing with minority groups, uh, especially religious minorities, because people will base their bigotries on fictions. And you don't want to add to that fire. Most folk are just folk. Okay. Having done all this search and replace, having decided where your new settings are and change that, you have to do the heavy lifting. You must add setting. You've changed it, but you have to now describe it. Character descriptions, because when you wrote your fanfic, you were using individuals that everybody who's going to read it knows what they look like. So you didn't have to describe them. Now you have to describe them. And don't just describe the actor. Okay? Don't do that. Change them so that they are even more individual. Now, you change them in accordance with the needs of the story. If they have to be a muscle-bound individual for the story to work, you keep them muscle-bound. But maybe you change their race. Maybe you change their eye color, their hair color, but you change them. You have to give the background world. What are these people's motivation? That's done for you when you're doing a fanfic. The characters all have a backstory. They no longer do. So you have to drop that in on the fly. And don't just do plunk. Do not do huge reams of exposition. Let it come out as the story goes along. Use it to flesh out sections. Use it to add flavor. And it will have to be, if you're going to keep it consistent with your fanfic, it's going to have some commonalities with that. But it should flow naturally and take advantage. Do what you would like to have seen done. Let the characters come alive. You add a lot of your own style at this point. Now, the good thing about character description is it's generally sparse. If you gave most character descriptions that are given in fiction to a police sketch artist, he'd look at you and say, and you have hair color, skin tone, hair length, uh, if you say she was a tall, willowy, dark-haired beauty, that's probably enough. Or he was a ruggedly handsome, muscular man. Again, probably enough. People will fill it in, and people like to fill it in because depending on the genre, they'll fill it in with their fantasy. Now, I can think of half a dozen women who I'm likely to put the image in there, but no harm in that. Now, when you're changing setting, you have to ask yourself, what purpose does the setting fulfill? You can talk in a bar as easily as you can in a coffee shop. What does the setting fulfill? Can a Irish pub become an Italian restaurant? Can a plane become a boat? Ask yourself that, and ask yourself what fits with new developments that you've added and the way that you've spun things out. At the start of the book, realize no one knows or cares about your character. And again, this comes into the heavy lifting. You have to find things to make us care. Now, what makes us care? Most of us are somewhat compassionate. Most of us can look at somebody who's having a rough time and wish it was easier for them. Most of us will care about somebody who's like us. The exception to this is man-women relationships. Men are far more likely to invest quickly in a female character who they find somewhat attractive. Okay, we haven't been out of the cave that long. Okay, it's a guy thing, but you have to make the person care, and that means building backstory. And as you go through, look and remove superfluous characters. And one of the great ways to do this is to lump whatever contribution the secondary character made into one of your primaries. That gives your primary more time to have the spotlight and enhances how much people care about your primary. Now, this is another tip that's good for all writing. And it goes back to your search and replace command, which was probably the greatest thing they've come out with in word processing. Suddenly, finally, very, and there are other words you'll use the S&R command on. Use it, read the paragraph. And if that word isn't pulling any weight, remove it. Also, words that you use habitually. In the novel Nuki Kubai, in the rough draft of that, I went through and I have a tendency to overuse the word okay, both in speech and in writing. And I put okay, okay into the search and replace command. And I think it was over 1,000 incidents of it in the book. So I then went through and for each incident, except for those involving my lead character, Ray McAndrews, my modern day wizard, I removed okay, except for one place where it was just too much what a current day person would say in that situation for me to take it out. But that's the only incidence of okay in that entire book that is not said by Ray. This had the effect of shifting it from being my bad habit into being an idiosyncrasy of Ray's speech, so that when the reader sees okay, it helps to solidify that that's Ray talking, and it added to the character's personality. But generally, look for phrases, words and phrases you overuse. Search and replace, and be really critical and cut most of them. And if you can use them in a clever way, like making them an idiosyncrasy of a character's speech, that's fine. That's fine. That's enhancing the writing. But be aware of your habits. Be aware of what you overuse. Okay. And this comes in, the collateral thing is set up unique words for your characters, because we do have them. With me, it's okay. With other people, well, I've known people who couldn't complete a sentence without using profanity. I don't recommend that, but it can be useful for characters with particular backgrounds. But people have catchwords. And this is one thing I recommend for anybody writing dialogue. Eavesdrop on people. Don't do it to get information. Do it to hear how they speak, the rhythm and cadence. I mean, I'm not fantastic at accents, but if somebody says, "You all should come on over and have some grits. My mammy makes the best grits in the city." You immediately characterize that person. You place them in the American South. And you can build on that. If somebody is very measured in their speech, almost ponderous, that tells you about the character too. Set the tone of your character to convey their nature. This is the strength of dialogue. It doesn't just give the words and information in the words. It can have tone. And tone will tell you about character. It's characterization. Some people don't like it. I tend to write to sound like people. And if I'm trying to do somebody who is uneducated, I'm not saying stupid, because many people are very bright and they speak like this, but they haven't had the opportunity of learning different ways of speech. They haven't gone to college or university. But doing, dropping the G off ing, air for there. You can create an accent that implies a person of lower education. And this is for fiction. This is not slamming anybody in reality. And frankly, there's a lot of people out there, they're brilliant. They just speak in a particular way. But it can set the tone for fiction. And that's something that is always useful for a writer. Okay, now for converting the fanfic, After you've done all this with your search and replace command, going and doing all the obvious things, you go back to the start and you go through it from beginning to end and you make it consistent. You're looking for consistency for technology. If you've gone into a science fiction format, don't have buildings that we would have today. If you're 1,000 years from now, there might be a couple old relics still sitting around, but they're going to be looked on like we look on buildings from the Roman period. Keep in mind that technology advanced in one area will affect others. If you have spaceships moving faster than light, well, that implies materials technology far in advance of what we have. So improve the bulletproof vests to the point where projectile weapons are useless. I mean, the argument can be made that the armor in Star Wars, which the stormtroopers wear and seems to do absolutely nothing, is actually 100% as effective against bullets and even light artillery, which is why they wear it. And that has forced weapon technology to go to a energy weapon, which it doesn't stop. But up your technology to stay consistent across the board. Your character and environment, make sure they are smooth, make sure they fit with what you now have. Make sure the conflict is appropriate to the environment, especially with the historical factor. Don't if approach to the environment, especially regarding historical factor. Yeah, goal is to salvage the work and make it your own. That's the two prongs of this goal. We write fanfic for love. Bring that same love to your own work. Keep tight-lipped about the original source material because it's just to be on the safe side. And really, it's one thing. No one really wants to know they're being, well, actually, they might like to know that they're, at a personal level, the creators might like to know that they've inspired you so deeply. However, at a commercial level, remember the original source material is illegal. Now, you can say some things like West Side Story is a fanfic for Romeo and Juliet. And it's a wonderful example. West Side Story does not infringe, well, if Romeo and Juliet was still under copyright, which it isn't, but West Side Story would not infringe on that copyright. And it's a marvelous example. We have Forbidden Planet, which really is The Tempest. And there's a whole series of books that are basically rewrites of Shakespeare. Now, if you have 30% or more original source material, and you're covered as long as the names and blatantly recognizable things have been changed. So if you need a little bit of reassurance that you're not going to get done, that's it. Be aware, people are going to be far more critical of your original work than they are of your fanfic. Fanfic is a self-congratulatory community. It's a wonderful thing. There are times that everybody needs to be told that they're good at something. Everybody needs to feel positive. But that ends when you put it out under your own name. Then you're in the slog with everybody else and you're my competition. Actually, you're going to find, for the most part, the writing community is very mutually supportive. And if you are nice, honest, and decent to people, they'll be nice, honest, and decent back. Just please don't do what one parent forced his child to do at a fan expo one year and go down author row, having forcing her to ask every author in the line if they would go over her book for her because it's an imposition. It's considered unprofessional. And there are groups like Critters Online Writing Group, uh, critters.org, where you can get your manuscripts critiqued. You critique one story a week, and they'll critique one a month, one of yours a month. That's not how it's officially done, but that's what it works out to. Now, with Critters, let me tell you, the act of critiquing somebody else's work will teach you as much about your writing as having your own work critiqued, and be open to criticism. Um, be open to, okay, you're always going to have some jerks, and some people are always going to be jerks. But if you put a story through a critiquing group and 6 out of 8 people comment that you're overly wordy, that's a pretty good commentary on that story. So work on it. If this happens over the course of several stories that they're saying you're overly wordy, this means you have to analyze your writing style and you have to work on being concise, because write tight is one of the great maxims of writing. Every word should pull weight. Neil Gaiman said that. Every word should do work. And if it can work on several different levels, that's all for the best. Now, everybody gets lazy occasionally and things slip, but overall, it's a good way, good thing to go. Another one is show, don't tell. And I have an issue with this because for years I heard people going, show, don't tell, show, don't tell, show, don't tell, like a bunch of demented parrots. And nobody would ever say what they meant. And then I eventually realized what the base of that is. Set up circumstances and scenes and actions that inform your reader of what you want them to know instead of just telling them. If you want them to know the guy is a great engineer, have him laying under a piece of equipment and fixing it. Well, his ranking officer is going, oh, that's never going to work. You can't get that going. This thing is scrap. And then he has it fixed, lickety split. Set up that scene instead of just saying, oh, he was the best at what he did. Or he was the best engineer we've ever had. Or drop it into conversation that somebody's trying to steal the guy away from the ship that he's on, and the captain is refusing to let him go because he needs him to keep the damn thing running. But don't just tell your audience. Let your audience experience it. And that's what's meant by show, don't tell. when it comes to fanfic, try to live up to the best of the original creator's work. And this is one that Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5. I keep getting his name wrong. For some reason yeah, I think I got it right that time. I'm looking for his book on screenwriting. Absolutely fantastic book, by the way. I recommend it to anybody who wants to do screenwriting. But one of the things he says in the special features on one of the Babylon 5 spin-offs is bad writers borrow from other writers. Good writers steal from other writers. And I think that is very telling, because when you borrow a thing, you never truly make it your own. When you steal something, well, yeah, you make that your own. And that's why that's such a great line for a writer, because what it's saying is be inspired by others. Take an idea that somebody else has had, sure, then make it your own. Asimov laid down the idea of putting a moral imperative into robots so that they would not harm humans. Take that idea, make it your own. You're not bound by the laws of robotics as Asimov put them. But could you program in a profound respect for organic life? And then play along those lines. There's huge things you can do. Now, I'm just going to, I wasn't expecting anything. All right. Well, I'm going to cut this short because basically I've gone through my notes and I don't really think I have too much else to add. I hope you enjoy the rest of BlitCon, and I'll see you tomorrow. And with any luck, things will work out with that. Okay. Well, you have a good one, and take care. And I hope some of you will consider taking the best of your fanfic writing and putting out something that I could buy at my local bookstore. Toodles.